Mr. President, I'm here for my now 28th Waste of the Week. Been coming down to the floor of the Senate for 28 weeks, pointing out government waste. People say, some in this chamber say, oh, we can't cut a penny more. We're down to the bone. We're far from it. This is just a small effort. Having been shot down in terms of anything larger to deal with our fiscal situation here because the White House simply does not want to engage in that. We at least ought to be able to take steps here as a body to eliminate the kind of wasteful spending that takes place on a daily basis here in Washington. Now, I've come down once a week to do this. I come down every day. I come down every hour and point out something in this vast array of federal government that never stops growing that simply falls in the category of waste, fraud, and abuse. But so far, we're well over our $100 billion goal of accumulated waste. And today, this is number 28. And specifically, this particular week's Waste of the Week is facilitator fraud in the Social Security Disability Insurance Fund. What is facilitator fraud? Facilitators are those who work with people who supposedly, legitimately qualify for Social Security disability. The facilitator helps them fill out the forms, go through the process, qualify for the payments, and if accepted, then they become part of the system receiving those benefits. Facilitator fraud are those who are using the system as a means to fraudulently, illegally qualify people for receiving these benefits. They go out and look for claimants, either by putting out ads or using social media or word to mouth. Look, you too can get checks from the federal government, even if you're not disabled, because we've got it figured out as to how you can qualify. We will help you process these forms. We have connections with doctors and medical providers who will be able to give us written information, even though it's fraudulent and illegal, that you can use to justify with Social Security Administration to qualify for Social Security disability. And then when those payments start coming, the facilitators get a percentage of that, or they've worked out some kind of agreement that you'll pay us this amount of money if we can get you the claim. So once that disability payment is made, the financial compensation to the facilitator goes in place, and there's this vicious cycle of fraud and abuse. So instead of robbing Peter to pay Paul, Peter and Paul are robbing the federal government together and reaping the benefits. Now, over the last 5 years, the Social Security Administration has seen an amazing increase in fraudulent activity associated with facilitators. The estimate is potentially 1% and perhaps even more, we haven't really tied this down yet, of SSDI payments are affected by facilitator fraud waste, totaling $1.4 billion per year. What we've taken today is a rough estimate of what this would amount to over a 10-year period of time, and we've dropped the 0.4, and so we think that at least $10 billion over 10 years is a conservative estimate of the waste of taxpayers' dollars through fraudulent, illegal means. Last month, the Social Security Inspector General, Pat O'Carroll, testified before the Joint Economic Committee, which I chair, and he shared his concerns about this question. He said there are people, and I quote, he said there are people out there in positions of trust that we have to rely on for information as to determining whether or not a claim is a legitimate claim for coverage. And he said, but if those people that we rely on to provide us the information are defrauding the government by sending in false claims backed up by false medical support, he said the taxpayer here is being taken to the cleaners. We have found, and I quote again, we have found that in some cases the former Social Security employees have left the employment of the federal government. They know how the system works. They then go into conspiracies with unscrupulous medical providers and attorneys where they will use improper information and facilitate getting in so that a person will get the benefits and they get the payment and the rewards. Last year, a San Diego area psychologist confessed to charging his patients $200 each to fabricate medical evidence to support their disability claims. Imagine getting up in the morning, going to your desk, you've got the credentials of a doctor, or in this case, a psychologist, to issue an opinion as to what the medical condition is of this claimant, and then participate in this cycle of fraudulent activity and be paid for it. That's his job. That's what he does every day. Well, fortunately, we caught him, and that's how we know about this. In August of 2013, federal law enforcement officials and the Puerto Rico Police Department arrested 75 people in Puerto Rico and dismantled a large-scale disability fraud scheme involving physicians, and a claimant representative is also a former Social Security Administration employee. So not only individuals are doing this, but there are groups of individuals who are working through a system. And these are just two small examples of what's happening here. To give some credit, the discovery of this has reduced some progress in terms of addressing this problem. The most recent budget deal that we reached here in the Senate included increased funding for what's called the Cooperative Disability Investigation Units, which investigate suspicious disability claims and prevent fraud, hopefully before it happens. Additionally, the Social Security Administration's Regional Disability Fraud Pilot Program works specifically on facilitator fraud across the country, trying to identify those high-dollar, high-impact cases involving third-party facilitators conspiring with claimants to defraud Social Security Administration. Well, it's a pilot program. I don't know why we haven't had that program in place with this program from its very inception. In fact, every agency that is distributing funds for individuals should have as a component of that agency an investigative process for fraud, waste, and abuse, because you name the program that is writing the checks to the claimants, and I'll be able to tell you, we'll be able to find those that are fraudulently taking money out of the taxpayers' wallets. So we're going to keep coming down here every week, keep putting the spotlight on waste, fraud, and abuse. And today we add another $10 billion to the total, which keeps growing and growing, and now is at a total of $128,812 billion of documented waste, fraud, and abuse. This is not something we make up. This is not something we read about in the paper. This is something where agencies of the federal government who have accountability and responsibility to try to dig in and find this abuse provide this information on a regular basis, but it is something that the taxpayer simply cannot afford, should not be obligated to pay, and it's something that highlights the fact that we have a government growing beyond its means. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor and suggest the application.